In the previous lesson, I showed you how to install Node and verify that it was working and write a couple sample applications. Now let's talk about something that's related and used by all Node programmers, which is Node Package Manager. And I'd like to share some conceptual ideas here at the front. If you've ever heard about icebergs, you've been told that the majority of the iceberg is found under the water and the minority of the iceberg is found above the water. And I find that Node applications are much like that, that most of the code that you write is the minority of the code in any application, and the majority of the code in any of your applications is written by other people. So you might write one file as part of the next example that we're going to do in this course, and just running your simple code sample is going to require a lot of other people's libraries. So here's the same idea represented again. If this is a traditional structure for a web application, you have a web browser out here, you have a server where you've installed Node, and you're going to be deploying your applications there, and that's going to be a folder full of JavaScript files, HTML files, CSS files, and of all of the files that you deploy onto that server in a folder of application code, a small percentage, especially early on, is going to be your code, and the majority of that code is going to be other people's stuff. And so this raises the question, if most of the code that I'm deploying and using is other people's code, where do I get it? And let me just take a step back here and say that in some other languages for the web or just general use programming languages, once you install them, pretty much all the libraries that you are going to be using are included with the language. But with JavaScript, we tend to have 3 different places where we're getting code that we program with every day. We can find out about what those libraries are by going to the official JavaScript documentation. So let's go ahead and Google JavaScript documentation. I'm going to open up a web browser and I'll type in JavaScript documentation. Notice it says developer.mozilla.org. I know that's the right place. And when I come to this website, it doesn't look very user-friendly to me. But if we scroll down the left-hand side, it says built-in objects. And if I expand that, these are the top-level classes, objects, or if you will, libraries that you might be using in your code. If you've been following along in my course, you've used array before, you've used date before, and let's see, what about some others? We've done JSON, and that's about the highlights there. So let's go ahead and, oh, I know the one I was looking for, math, right there. Math is another one we've used for math.round and math.random. Let's go ahead and click on that. And so you'll notice for one of these built-in objects, it describes what it is in the documentation. It shows the static properties, the things that you can do a math dot on. And for example, I can do math.py, and that's going to be a variable that includes a number that I can use in my code. Same thing with these other properties right here. If I scroll down, I can see the methods that I can call doing math.something. We haven't done much with those trigonometric functions there, but we have done math.round, math.random, which are right there. And then if you click on any of those, it'll show you code samples of how to use those. All right, one thing I would like for you to notice about these built-in objects is the number of them. So I'll expand that, and it looks like we've got about 15 per page here, so 15, 30, 40-ish. So in total, there are about 40 different things that you might be using in your code, and this is always available if you're programming within the context of a web browser or if you've installed Node. All right, but that's not all. All right, we did the first thing, which was check out the official JavaScript documentation. If you've installed Node, then there's going to be an additional set of classes, objects, or libraries that you can use. So let's go find out about that by Googling Node documentation. So I type that in, and I find that the documentation is on nodejs.org. And once I'm there, I can go to the Docs tab, scroll down a little bit, and I notice that there are lots of versions of Node, which means that the objects are potentially always changing, and generally speaking, there'll be more and more over time. One of these links here says API reference documentation. If I click on that, then I see the same types of objects in both columns here. And let's kind of scroll down. Well, first off, let's get an idea of how many there are. Well, this looks like there's about 30. So on the other page with JavaScript documentation, we had like 40, 45-ish. Looks like we have about 30 here. And let's see if any of these names sound like things that we want to use. Let's see, console, so that's for writing out to the screen. We're doing console.log. I see file system, so that's for interacting with your computer's hard drive and reading the files that are there. There are some libraries here related to doing web development and making your code perform as a web server and respond to web requests. I see things for interacting with the operating system, where potentially you could find out how much space is left on your computer's hard drive, or perhaps how much memory is being used currently. Path, that's something that relates to finding the folder structure on your computer, and sometimes when you're doing an application, you need to find where your HTML pages are, and so this object might be helpful with that. And so let's just go ahead and click on it. So there's path, and with path we can see what looks like a bunch of methods that are available as part of that, and possibly some attributes that are set or properties that are set. And if we scroll down, we can see how to use it in our code. And then eventually there's a list of all of the methods and explanations of them and how to use them. Okay, so between the original JavaScript documentation and the Node documentation, we're now up to about 70 or so items that we can use in our code on a regular basis. And lastly, let's talk about the topic of the day, which is NPM and NPM modules. There are over 1 million modules or libraries of functionality that you can download to use in your own applications. And so that's the important part. You got about 75 over here that basically come with the installation of JavaScript and Node. And over here, here's a library of code, or a bunch of code, a directory of code that's out there in the public that everybody in the world can download and use. And there are over 1 million options. So let's go ahead and Google NPM modules. And it comes up with npmjs.com. And here's the website. And if you know the module that you're looking for, you can search for it. So if you're doing web development, you might want to do Express, and you'll see the actual Express library package, and you'll see things that are potentially related to that. Here's another one that is often used called Lodash. It's kind of a funny take on the keyboard character, which is underscore, calling it the Lodash. And there are a bunch of different things that relate to Lodash. There's the official package, and if I click on it, it'll tell me some information about it, like how to download this library using NPM onto my computer, and then how to start using it. Although that being said, this isn't the best place to go for documentation on this package. You can just type in Lodash documentation, and then there will be a separate website for that. Same thing with Express, where there'll be full documentation about a particular thing. But in terms of where to go to find out if that package exists, this website is one of those places. Okay, let's go ahead and start using NPM now that we've learned a little bit about it. Let me say some additional things about Node Package Manager before we go on and use it. So here are some main ways that we use the Node Package Manager. It's a program that gets installed when you install Node. One of the things it helps you do is discover all of the programs that are out there for public use as part of that NPM public repository. So you might think about it as kind of a way to get access to a Netflix-like library of code. So there's millions of things out there, and you need to discover what it is that you're looking for. NPM, when you run it from the command line on your local computer, helps you install Node programs. And we'll demonstrate that in just a minute. So those first two kind of fit in a similar category: finding the program, installing the program. When I say installing, I mean you're downloading it into a folder on your computer where you're going to be using it and leveraging it as part of your program. Now, just as you download and use other people's programs, you can make your own. So typically when you start a program, an application that you're building that uses Node, you're going to use npm to scaffold your application, meaning it's going to set up some files and config files and folders and that sort of thing that are going to allow you to build your program in a good, sane, structured way, and then have it set up so that you could actually share it back to npm if you so choose. Anyway, it just makes it a really nice way to organize your code, manage your code as you're developing, and then when you need to deploy it later on, it's going to do some really nice things for you. Okay, let's go ahead and do a demonstration about this. The first thing I want to do is I want to go to a folder on my computer that I have just recently created. It's on my desktop, and it is npm example. I've opened up a folder, and I'm going to now go over to terminal, and I'm going to say new terminal. And notice that there's nothing in here currently. There are no files. The first thing I want to do is do this installation command, and I'm going to use Lodash. Lodash is a library that has a set of utilities for formatting strings, for working with numbers, for working with arrays. So it's a bunch of general purpose stuff that's generally low-level kinds of things. So watch what happens when I type in npm install Lodash. Now it's possible that it didn't do anything for you, and if that's the case, then you needed to do something that says npm init, and I'm going to do that when I do express in just a little bit in a future video. So if you do need to do that because nothing happened, then jump ahead and watch how to use that. But sometimes you can just do npm install and then the name of the package, and it'll do what just happened in my computer, which is it created a folder for Lodash. And if I expand this, it shows that there's one folder called modules and one folder called Lodash, and within that there are a lot of files. So doing that command where you just say npm install can potentially download a lot of things. So the first thing it does is it makes sure there's a folder there to put in modules from that big repository in the sky where there are millions of packages. And then for the package name that you're going to be using, it creates another folder for that. And let's just go ahead and look on our hard drive and verify that. So I'm in the npm example folder, and if I go in there, there's my Lodash Lodash library. And if I had installed other things, if I kept on doing npm install, like npm install express, then there will be other folders that will appear here. Another thing that has shown up is this thing that says Packagelock.json, and it's showing me not only the package that I've installed, but also the version of it. So as you start installing lots of different things for use in your application, it's nice that npm keeps track of which versions you downloaded. This makes it easier to package up and export your program, because then other people that want to use your program can also download and install the exact correct libraries that need to go with your program. Okay, once we've done that, let's go ahead and create a new file. So I'll just say practice.javascript, and let's go ahead and use Lodash now. So I'll say let underscore. Now this could be any variable, but just by convention, when people are using this particular library, they like to have the variable that represents it be an underscore, which is another way of saying low dash character. And I'll say let that variable equal require low dash. So even though I have downloaded all of those files related to that module, that package, into this folder, it's not accessible in my program until I explicitly reference that folder. So now I have a variable that references that folder, and now I can access the objects that are in there and run their methods. So I'll say import low dash package, just to make this clear. And now let's go ahead and just try out a few of the things that are in here. So I'll say console.log, and I can do underscore to reference this particular object and say .add, so that's one of its methods. And I'll just take two numbers, 5 and 10. And of course, add two numbers. And then let's try another method that comes with this, console.log, and underscore dot random, and we'll do a number between 0 and 5. So this is random number 0 to 5. Console.log, let's do something with a date. I'll do underscore dot now, and now. And this is the time in milliseconds. And then we'll do console.log underscore dot camel case. So this is for working with a string, and I'll put in a string that says, please make me all camel case. All right, I'll go ahead and save this file that I've been working on. And then down here in the bottom, if you remember how we run a node program that we've written, we type the word node space and then the name of the program, and it's practice.js. So I hit return, and we see everything works as expected. We added two numbers, we created a random number, we've got the time in milliseconds, and then we see how the camel case function works. Okay, so this was just a simple demonstration of how you initially import a package that's out there in the NPM repository, watch what changes it makes. Then I showed you how to reference that package that you have downloaded to your local computer, write a program that leverages that. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Okay, if you've been following along with my lessons, you have learned about Node, about NPM, about documentation in 3 different areas related to JavaScript. Now let's go ahead and create a more sophisticated application than just using a single module. We're going to use the Express package, which is going to allow us to create websites. Now, as I get into this, keep in mind that it's a little bit weird when you start with this. When you use people's methods, or rather objects that they've created, using them and their methods that come with them, these are just things that people have made up. And so it's not a universal principle like, some of the basics of programming. A basic of programming is the fact that you can write a function in a language, or that you could use an operator like plus or minus. As we get into using Express specifically for the web, this is just somebody's way of creating an object and having some methods that go along with it. And so if you follow their steps and use their methods appropriately, you can have a working website. So initially it feels a little bit foreign, but you get used to using this particular package as you use it over and over and over again. So the first thing we need to do is create a folder where we're going to put our application. And so I'm going to come out here to my desktop, and I'll say new folder, and I'll say node app, or actually let's call this Express app. All right, that's where I'll put my website. And let's go ahead and move into that folder. And get to the top. There it is. Okay, I have a blank slate in which to work at this point. Okay, previously I talked about how sometimes if you try to do npm install, it may not work if you haven't done npm init first, which helps scaffold your application and set it up to include other libraries. So let's go ahead and open the terminal and watch what happens when we scaffold our application so that it can be used to not only download other applications but be set up for sharing as well. I type in npm init, and it's going to ask me a set of questions. Again, this relates to sharing this file, rather our application, with other people later on. I'm going to take the defaults right now. It's saying, what do you want to call your package, what version number. When you run this application, there's going to be a lot of files. What do you want the first file to be that gets run? And I'll say, just take the default index.js. If I'm using some type of testing suite or storing my code in a shared repository, I can say that. For the author, I can put in my name. Again, that's optional. And when you're sharing things in the big public repository, what's the usage license you want associated with it? All right. Once you've done those several things, which you could take the defaults on all of them if you want, it's announcing to me that it's going to write this file called package.json, and it's going to drop it in the main folder right here. It's asking me, is this okay? And I just hit return to accept that. And there we go. The thing that it said it was going to write has in fact been created. Let's go ahead and create a little more space. I click on this file. And this is basically a configuration file that describes the application that I'm going to be building. And NPM is going to continue to add things to this as I build my application. That way I don't have to do it manually. And that's a really nice thing. So for example, if Lodash was going to be part of my program, it's going to add Lodash as something in a list of programs or packages that I'm using as part of my application. Okay. Let's go ahead and install Express. And Express is a module or package that allows us to do web development and create websites. So watch what happens over here on the left as I install this. npm install Express. And you can use the full word install or just the I. npm install Express. Okay, now because I've actually installed a package, it created a node modules folder, and in there are a lot of other modules in addition to Express. So what does this mean? This means that Express leverages a lot of other modules, a lot of other packages, and so those needed to be downloaded and installed, or made available at least, along with the core code for Express. At a high level, this means that anything that you potentially install using this type of command and download could bring with it a whole bunch of other folders and files with it in order for it to be able to run. So they're oftentimes not just single files or single folders of information. Okay, that application or that module, that package has been installed along with a whole bunch of others. If I go back to this package.json, notice that even though I didn't manually change it, running that command has added a dependency to that config file. And it says that a particular version of Express is going to be used with my application that I haven't even begun to write yet. And then over here in this Packagelock.json, I see lots of different packages that have been downloaded and are meant to be used along with Express, and you can see the versions of those. So NPM is keeping track of all these things. You can just worry about the easy things like install the package and then just start using it. Okay, let's go ahead and start creating a web application. I'm going to say create a new file, and I'm going to call it index.js. And let's just write a few lines. First thing I want to do is import the package or the module, which is Express. And so I'll say let express equal require express. Okay, so now I have a reference to the code that's in the express folder within the node modules folder. Now let's create object of type express. Let app equal express. So even though we didn't use the new syntax, when we're using express, this essentially accomplishes the same thing. It creates an object with a variable name there that we can then interact with using its methods. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here in creating our Hello World app, in essence, is we're going to do something called create a route. And a route is when you type in something into your URL, so mysite.com /, that would be the root directory of your application, or if you said mysite.com / about, that's a different folder or a different route. And for every folder or every route that you create for your application, for your website, you need to create a different route or way to route the code when somebody visits you on the server. And so let's create a route or a thing to do when somebody types in just a regular domain name, and we capture that by using a /. So at this point, you'll just follow along with me. You do app.get, and I need to type in two different parameters. The first parameter is the thing that the people typed in when they visited your website. And in this case, it's /. Could be / about. In this case, that's just the root. If you're not used to using callback functions, then it may look a little strange, but the next thing I'm going to do is add in a function here, an anonymous function. This function takes two parameters, the request object, which is the information that's coming from the browser, and the response object, which is something that enables us to write a response back to the browser. So here's my anonymous function, and this gets called when somebody visits the / there. So request, response, and then I do the arrow notation, curly braces, I'll put a little semicolon right there to end off my statement, and then I just do this simple thing, response.send, and I say hello world from server. All right, so we have set things up so that we know what functionality we're expecting from our website. It's only going to accept traffic at the main URL of the website. The last thing that we need to do is basically turn on the server, and we do that by typing app, so referencing that same object again, listen. Now by default, most websites are running on port 80, and you don't have to type in port 80 when you visit them and type it into your URL, but secretly your browser actually puts in that :80, port 80 when you're visiting it. Think of it like a television station. Every server can have tens of thousands of different stations that it can broadcast on. 80 is the default for websites, and when you're doing development, you oftentimes use different ones, and one of the ones that we commonly use is 3000. So what I'm just saying is that I'm going to start up a web server, have it run on port 3000, and then again, there's a little function that I can run, and this will again be an anonymous function that doesn't have any parameters. And I just want my computer to give me a little message when the server starts. So I'll say console.log. I'm going to say server started. Okay, and with that, I'm ready to launch my web server. So all I have to do is go node space index.js, and it says server started. Let's cross our fingers. Let's see what happened. All right, so I'm going to go to a web browser, and I can either type in 127.0.0.1:3000. That's the IP address of my local computer, or instead of 127.0.0.1, the equivalent of a domain name for your local computer is localhost. localhost just gets translated into 127.0.0.1. All right, so either localhost or 127, etc., port or colon 3000. We type that in, we hit return, and it says hello world from server. Awesome. Again, sell that, make $1 million. Okay, so that's working. And let's talk about routes here for a second. I said that this works specifically with like the root of your website. What if I wanted to have another location on my website, like a help page? So I just copy and pasted that, and I'll say, let's create another route. And I'll say anytime somebody types in /about, I'll say, this is the about page. And let me just stop for a second here. Because this is a string and it's being sent to the web browser, I could, up above here, create a variable and just pass in that variable here. And I could do something like HTML, and I could just do a full HTML document in there. And it would require a lot of concatenation to make that string. But in theory, you could create a whole HTML document and then just pass that variable right there. However, that wouldn't be the best way to do it. I'll show you a different way to serve up an actual full HTML page later on, but for right now, let's just use the send and send in some text. All right, so let's go ahead and hit save, and then we'll go back out to our web browser. Now, watch what happens here. If I type in about, it says cannot get about. Well, that's weird because I just wrote it in the code. So what's happening here? And what's happened is I have not restarted my server. So I'll hit Control C, and that stops things. And then I'll start it again. And then if I reload, it's working properly. So the lesson there is just because you added some things to your code doesn't mean that you can view it in the running application until you actually restart the server. All right, now let me just try some other things. So we did about, but did we make a help page? No. So what happens if we try to access help? Doesn't do anything. What happens if we try to do donut? Doesn't do anything. All right, so the lesson there is that if you want your web server, your application to return some result to you, you have to create a route.